Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas, on Thursday, January the 15th, and welcome to our commentary. Well, I just before we get started on the main topic today, I just want to remind you that I have a post over at the American Thinker today, once again discussing this incredibly stupid topic of what is a woman, what is a man. This is what was before the Supreme Court yesterday when they were arguing about, uh, men and women's sports and that kind of thing. And it's like, after a while, you just kind of go, this is crazy. I mean, this is crazy. Why are we even talking about stuff like this? What is the point of talking about stuff like this? So, anyway, um, I don't know. I think that somewhere along the line, hopefully, we get rid of this garbage and we can go on to more important issues like I don't know, just what's going on in the country. But this garbage of arguing, what is a woman, and you have literally members of the Supreme Court asking the people yesterday in the Supreme Court, to define a woman, and they couldn't. Well, that is insane. That's all I can tell you. Well, there's a lot of talk about the Insurrection Act, and I have a post coming out Friday morning about what's happening up in Minneapolis, where I think that if there was ever a time in recent memory where the president should activate the Insurrection Act, I think what's happening up in Minneapolis is exactly the right time. What you have up there is not just a protest against immigration. You can protest in this country all you want. You can spend the entire day protesting. You can go up and down the streets protesting. That doesn't stop you. Nothing stops you from doing that, other than maybe your time or maybe some local restrictions or whatever it may be. But you can demonstrate all day long in the United States about this or that and protest for this or this or that. That's not what's happening in Minneapolis. What's happening up there is that you have an organized rebellion against ICE agents, and you have the local government as well as the governor who are basically promoting it. They're basically promoting it. And they're basically telling, like the governor, for example, is telling people in this video that he put out, take a picture of the ICE agents because we want to make sure we can prosecute them. Well, first of all, the state is not going to prosecute a federal agent to begin with. This is utter nonsense of him to do that. But what it also does, and worse than that, it promotes the idea that somehow ICE is breaking the rules. So somehow ICE cannot be there, when in reality ICE has every right in the world to be in Minneapolis to enforce immigration laws. That's what they do. That's what they do. And it's just irritating to see how these local politicians and simply to try to pick a fight with Trump. That's what this is all about. I mean, the governor of Minnesota has some very big problems in Minnesota that he's going to have to deal with. All this fraud and all this money that cannot be accounted for. He's got some real problems in that area. The mayor of Minneapolis is just as irresponsible, if not more. He goes on an interview with Fox News, and he says, "Well, no, we want to pick up criminal aliens. We want to pick up criminals." But he really doesn't, because he doesn't allow ICE an opportunity to go into his jails, or they don't, when ICE has a detainer on somebody, they don't release that person. Well, if you're interested in dealing with criminals, why are you making it difficult for ICE in the business of picking up criminals? Why are you making it difficult for them to do their job? It would be a heck of a lot easier if Minnesota would do what Texas does, what Florida does, what most of the states do, by the way, which is to simply work with ICE and meet the objective. The objective is to remove people from our society who are criminals and who shouldn't be here, and who should be processed by ICE, because they are not just criminals, but they're also in many cases illegal aliens. And so I think the time is about right. I think President Trump should very seriously consider, invoking the Insurrection Act and bring troops into Minneapolis to take care of that. I would also argue that he should have the Department of Justice or a federal judge issue a warrant, and basically, or some kind of a document telling the governor of Minnesota and the mayor of Minneapolis that they have to turn over to ICE the people that they are protecting. And if they don't do that, they're violating federal law. And then you go after these two people. I think this whole situation in Minneapolis has reached a point where it can no longer be tolerated. You look at some of these videos, these attacks on ICE, that should not be tolerated. And the only place where these things are tolerated really is in places like Minneapolis and LA and places like that. It doesn't happen in the whole country. It doesn't happen in the whole country. In fact, during the interview with Fox News, the person doing the interview brought up that point. He says, "Look, this doesn't happen in many places around the country. It just happens in your city. So what's going on?" He had a difficult time answering that, but he came up with some excuse about how the citizens, neighbors were protecting neighbors and all of that. Well, you're not protecting neighbors when you're keeping the federal authorities away from criminals. So you're not protecting neighbors when you're doing that. You're doing something else, but you're not protecting your neighbors when you do that. So I think the Insurrection Act, I think the time has come for the president to use it in Minneapolis and just go for it. Go for it and use it. Now, there's also been some talk in the media here about how President Obama did it. How is it that he was able to deport so many people and nothing like this ever happened? Well, I happen to have a little bit of personal experience about that because I was here in Texas at the time that was going on. And I remember there was all kinds of debates going on, people saying that Obama was mistreating some of these people. Remember the cages that they had in South Texas for the kids and all of that. But back then, I remember being on TV back then in the Spanish station back then, and I was actually defending President Obama. I actually said he's doing what the president has to do, which is to enforce immigration laws. Now, you didn't see the kind of violent backlash against ICE back then, but it doesn't mean that ICE wasn't running into opposition. In fact, they had a lot of opposition. There were many, many local, some of the immigrant groups who were protesting Obama, saying that they're taking kids out of homes and separating families and taking people out of work. Sometimes they would take people out of their jobs and arrest them by ICE. So the main difference really between what Trump is doing now and what Obama was doing back then is that there was no organized resistance to what President Obama was doing, because the immigrant groups, activists and so on, who were very angry with President Obama did not go as far as what we're seeing now, where we're seeing organized rebellion against the federal government. They weren't doing that with President Obama. They were kind of going along with him as much as possible. Maybe it's because they, in general, supported his policies. I don't know. But the fact is that he wasn't getting this kind of resistance from the people in his own party over the deportations, because the deportations, as I said many times when I defended President Obama during that time, the deportations are completely logical. You have to deport people who are in your country illegally, especially if they go through the courts and the courts say you cannot be here. I mean, many of these people have in fact gone through a judge, and the judge says you cannot be here. They get a letter. I've seen these letters where they get a letter from a judge and he says, "Hey, thanks for your time. And I heard your case, but you don't qualify to stay here. You have to leave the country." Well, what do you do with people like that who defy a judge? You simply, wash your hands and say, well, that's the way it goes. No, you have to have some kind of rules. And deporting immigrants or illegal immigrants is part of the job of a federal government. I don't care what country it is. Other countries do the same thing. So anyway, that's why I think President Obama didn't get this kind of violent reaction, because many of the people that were supporting him, they were angry with him over immigration, but they liked him on other things, and they decided not to do this to President Obama. They obviously don't like President Trump. They get hysterical when it comes to President Trump, so they're trying to make life difficult for this. Now, my warning to the Democrats is that if they think that defunding ICE is a winning strategy, I hope they think that one through. because that's not a winning strategy. That's not going to get him a lot of votes, particularly once you get closer to the next presidential election. Even in the, even in the midterms, I don't think that's going to be a winning strategy across the country. So anyway, turn on the Insurrection Act. I think it's time for the president to do that. I think it's time to get that going in Minneapolis and send a message that we're not going to put up with this kind of these attacks, really, on federal officials, in this case, ICE. Well, let me take you on this day in history back to 1967. That would be what, 59 years ago. My goodness. The first Super Bowl was played 59 years ago. Now, they didn't call it the Super Bowl back then. It was actually called the AFL versus NFL championship game. And what was interesting about that particular game is that it was actually shown both on CBS, which used to carry the NFL games, and NBC that used to carry the AFL games. Both stations were showing it, or both networks were showing the game. The game itself was kind of one-sided in the sense that the game was kind of white, as I say, one-sided because the Packers were a much better team than Kansas City. I mean, that was the Packer team that was probably one of the greatest teams of all time. And even though Kansas City was a good team, it wasn't quite as good as the Packers. And, the Packers won easily. They won the first two Super Bowls easily. The first one against Kansas City, the second one against the Oakland Raiders. But this one was the first one, and I remember watching that. With my brother, and it was a bit of a novelty, but nobody called it the Super Bowl. I think they didn't do that until many years later when they started calling the Super Bowl. Maybe when it got to number 4 or number 5 in the early 70s, they started calling it the Super Bowl. But back then, it was just called the AFL-NFL championship game, and that's all that it was. It was a game after each league had decided its own championship game. The Packers in the NFL, and in this case, Kansas City in the AFL. But they were good games. They were good teams, and a lot of fun to watch, as I recall, back in 1969. Well, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.